In our journey through time over these past 4 installments, we have witnessed DC Comics go through a lot as they attempted to adapt their characters outside of the medium of comic books. We bore witness to the dawn of their existence in Hollywood. We have seen their collaboration with the writers, directors, producers, and especially actors give birth to amazing triumphs of visual creativity, but also failures bad enough to boggle the mind. We have rejoiced as DC realized that they were no longer alone as Hollywood's font of creative characters and stories to amaze audiences of both television and movies with the arrival of quality productions from their decades-old rivals at Marvel Comics. And we have agonized over their attempts to give birth to their own shared universes on both television and at theaters. While largely failing, they did give birth to truly worthy adaptations of the DC pantheon of characters. That last era in history of DC Comics on film has spawned an uncertain future. It is a future that is additionally burdened by the massive amount of brand damage DC and Warner Bros. Have inflicted upon themselves through misfire after misfire on both television and in theaters. Brand damage that will be difficult to overcome with merely one good outing. One good show or one good movie will not entice those burned by repeated cancellations and bombs. Guiding that future is the talented director James Gunn of Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad fame, and his producing partner, Peter Safran, a man who has been involved in the Conjuring and Annabelle horror franchises, multiple DCEU projects, a number of spoof comedies, and rom-coms. With Warner Bros. Being sold to Discovery, DC was given a new path to take into the future. The new boss of Warner Bros. Discovery, David Zaslav, prioritized the alleviation of the company's massive debt, giving Gunn and Safran a mandate to do what is needed to be done to maximize the DC intellectual properties, something he viewed as having been squandered by the previous regime in charge of WB and DC. Gunn and Safran evaluated what they were given to work with, the already floundering and highly damaged DC Extended Universe in theaters, and the all but dead Arrowverse on television, and decided to stop throwing good money after bad into those two money pits. This was made easier with the sale of CW by Warner Bros. And Paramount to Nexstar, a company not inclined to keep the Arrowverse shows around now that the network was theirs. That left the DCEU. Seeing that the diminishing returns of the films had hit catastrophic levels after the puzzlingly lucrative Aquaman and the modestly successful Shazam, the co-chairman decided on a hard reboot of the entire studio's theatrical output. This meant the end to the DCEU. But what would replace it, fans wondered, when it finally looked like the studio was done funneling money into the financial black hole that was DC. James Gunn announced the creation of the DC Universe, an interconnected cinematic universe that would play out over movies, television series, and video games, having apparently not learned the lesson Disney Marvel was teaching all of Hollywood for free. And what would this new shared multimedia universe include? What projects did they have in mind that justified scrapping the entire DCEU? I am thrilled you asked, because it is a slate that is both baffling and frustrating. Let's go through it, shall we? The very first project planned to debut is one most normies, myself included, have never heard of. Creature Commandos. Not only will it not be Superman or Batman or even Wonder Woman, but it will be an adult animated series that will be released onto Warner Bros. Streaming service in late 2024. Led by the father of the Suicide Squad's Rick Flag Sr., it is the military and international force under the control of Amanda Waller, to be voiced by Viola Davis. Flag Sr. will be voiced by action star Frank Grillo. Other characters are largely unknown to normies aside from maybe the Bride of Frankenstein and Eric Frankenstein, aka Frankenstein's monster. How and why would DC make this project to kick off the new DCU is beyond my ability to understand. It is a group of characters that has no ability to draw a wide audience and hopefully begin to restore the reputation of the DC Comics brand beyond the comic book medium, especially given that the state of DC comic books in recent years. Half a year after announcing that the DC would be rebooting their cinematic universe, canning the DCEU in the process, a new Superman and Lois Lane were announced. Both roles went to relatively unknown actors with unimpressive filmographies. Superman/Clark Kent will be played by David Corenswet, whose most impressive credit was being on one episode of House of Cards and 11 episodes of a quickly canceled series titled The Politician. However, he is only 30 years old, so they will be able to get at least a few films out of him, and he does look the role. Lois Lane's casting was a little better, though Rachel Brosnahan's filmography is even less impressive than Corenswet's if one were to exclude the fact that she starred as the titular character of the marvelous Miss Maisel, for which she won an Emmy, 2 Golden Globes, and 2 Screen Actors Guild Awards. Gunn has said that the project will not be a rehash of previous Superman movies, excising the time spent going back over Superman's origin story. No, the new Superman movie will instead begin with Clark already in Metropolis as a young reporter at the Daily Planet. The story will apparently be about Clark reconciling his Kryptonian heritage with his human family in Kansas. Now, does this sound like it will do what DC and Warner Brothers need it to do? Namely, knock the socks off the audience and rekindle fans' love of DC characters in live action? Maybe. It will all come down to whether the story is enthralling enough, and if Corenswet and Brosnahan can manage screen chemistry and presence as one of the most iconic comic book couples in history. Especially Corenswet. Without a good Superman, everything that comes after is merely an exercise in futility. A better plan would have been to start with Batman, since fandom for Batman is rabid and will show up for DC at theaters. However, with the Batman sequel coming out, that would just be extremely confusing for normie audience members willing to give DC a chance again. So the DCU will ride or die on the back of Superman in July of 2025. For some reason, the follow-up film for Superman will be Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. Why is this odd? Because Supergirl is, at best, a second-tier DC character and generally follows after Superman has been established in audiences' consciousness for a while. In the 1980s, Christopher Reeve's Superman franchise was 3 movies in before they released a low-budget Supergirl movie that flopped rather hard. Well, the DCU will have a decent actress playing Supergirl/Kara Zor-El in Millie Alcock, who is fresh off playing a young Rhaena Targaryen in Season 1 of House of the Dragon. The choice of director is less impressive. Craig Gillespie, a director with only 2 successful movies in 14 years directing movies and television in Hollywood. Gillespie was known mostly as a director of commercials, and only Cruella and an indie flick that made a little over $50 million disproved the terrible track record he has at the box office. Add to that the fact that Supergirl has never been a great draw for normies, and this third outing of the DCU does not look promising. Could I be wrong? Of course. I was about Millie Alcock after watching the first episode of House of the Dragon Season 1. By the end of the first season, she was one of the best performances in a cast full of solid performances that largely were only tripped up by spots of less than stellar writing. That there are few details about what the film will entail or who else will be cast is also less than reassuring. And DC only gets worse from there. At the time of recording, there are no details about when fans should expect anything else after Supergirl's appearance in June of 2026. We only have names of projects and even scantier details than we have for Supergirl. Starting with movies, the next up should be The Authority, a project that definitely should not be in the first round of projects for a rebooted DC Comics cinematic universe. The Authority are a group that didn't even originate in DC Comics, but from an indie comic publisher, Wildstorm. That company was bought by DC in late 1998, and DC began introducing their characters into DC canon in 2011. The Authority is one of those groups. It is a group whose mission is to combat what they perceive as a broken world, able to be fixed only by taking matters into their own hands and doing what needs to be done at any cost. Now, if this were a movie that followed a couple of Batman movies, or even a couple of seasons of Waller or Peacemaker, it might make more sense and fit into the overarching story scheme. However, this would be the third theatrical release of the new DCU, following what should be a very optimistic and hopeful Superman movie and a Supergirl movie that should also have that kind of vibe for the overall story. Superman is a godlike figure that brings hope to humanity and gives them something to strive towards as he does his good deeds with truth, justice, and the American way as his motto. The Authority does not fit into that sort of story scheme without a lot of setup, which audiences will not be getting unless the movie opens with a 45-minute exposition dump to explain how the same world that has Superman putting down supervillains needs a bunch of humans also running around using brutal tactics to achieve their ends. As I said, this might make sense as an expansion to a couple of Batman movies, where we are treated to Gotham City going completely to shit. While that may be what we get, it will not be until after The Authority, and the Batman project planned also has issues. The DC movie we will get for that is currently one scheduled as The Brave and the Bold. It will be based on the Batman run of comic legend Grant Morrison, who is also the one who created the Robin that they will be introducing, Damian Wayne. Damian is Bruce's son, and one of the least popular Robins in Batman lore. He is also one of the more recent. They are skipping over a handful of previous Robins, including Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, and Tim Drake. Batman will also necessarily be an older version, even as they will be having a relatively young and inexperienced Superman for that side of the DCU. The Brave and the Bold has been described by James Gunn as a strange father-son story, which might be intriguing if they were not starting that story at the end, skipping multiple decades of history to get to it. We currently have no Batman cast, nor any other details except for the fact that director Andy Muschietti, recently responsible for The Flash, will helm the project, and his older sister Barbara Muschietti will be co-producing with James Gunn and Peter Safran. Just from those facts, this does not look promising. A lot will be riding on the casting of Batman and Damian, as well as who is chosen to write the script and how much interference that person will get from the studio. Then we have James Mangold, director of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Are you seeing the trend of failing upward here? Helming the remake of Swamp Thing. This will be the fourth iteration, fifth if you count the episode of Constantine, of the character in live action, none of which have turned out well with the possible exception of the 1982 movie, which has its own campy charm. The only thing known about the project is that it will have a darker, more gothic horror tone to it, and it will be taking inspiration from comic legend Alan Moore's run on the character from the saga of the Swamp Thing back in 1984-1985. Swamp Thing is not even a secondary DC character. Calling it niche is being generous, and so the audience for this movie is equally minuscule. That they are also putting enough money behind it to interest James Mangold to write and direct the project seems a little crazy for a studio whose parent company is trying to get out from under a mountain of debt. It is definitely not a character I would greenlight if I were trying to reboot an entire cinematic universe in a climate of skittish moviegoers and the complete meltdown of the genre at the box office. I especially would not when I was trying to repair the brand damage I just got done doing as the studio I ran completed the utter self-immolation of the previous cinematic universe. Moving on, last but certainly least is an untitled Teen Titans movie. The only information we have on this was that Ana Nogueira was confirmed in March of 2024 as being the writer for the project that was now in development. Nothing else is known about this production at time of recording. Now, Teen Titans is one of DC's most popular animated series in recent years, including getting a feature-length release to theaters in 2018 titled Teen Titans Go to the Movies. The film made a bit of money, but nothing to indicate that the characters would be popular enough to justify the money that would be required to bring characters like Starfire, Raven, and Cyborg to life in such a way as to do the characters justice in live action. I guess we will see. That is the current projected slate of movies being planned by DC to hit theaters over the next several years. Superman, Supergirl, The Authority, The Brave and the Bold, which will inevitably be retitled Batman the Brave and the Bold so people know what the hell they should be getting excited to watch in theaters. Swamp Thing, and Teen Titans. I'm sure you noticed what most DC fans noticed, namely that the slate is complete and utter shit that makes no sense if you know anything about DC characters and their history. Rather than doing the safe thing and banking their money on sure-thing movies with characters recognizable to normies, Gunn and Safran started with Superman and go down the hill from there. Even the Batman movie is less than intelligently constructed and titled if what you are trying to do is lure Batman fans and normies back to your franchise after decades of disappointments and bombs. But maybe they did better with their series lineup. Let's give it a look, shall we? They open with the previously mentioned animated series Creature Commandos in late 2024. And that is all we know except for the names of projects either filming or in development. Currently filming is the only project that will be carried over to the new DCU from the old DCEU. The series spin-off from the Suicide Squad, Peacemaker. Now, about the only reason to keep this when doing a complete reboot is so James Gunn doesn't have to permanently sleep on the couch since his wife is currently one of the stars. Jennifer Holland, aka Mrs. Gunn, played Amelia Harcourt in both the James Gunn-directed The Suicide Squad and the first season of Peacemaker as one of the Argus agents. Peacemaker was received well enough that a second season of the show was announced before DC and Warner Brothers were sold to Discovery Inc. When Gunn was put in charge of all of DC, he decided that his show would continue on as the sole holdover from the old cinematic universe. However, the first season would not be canon for the new universe. Instead, we will confuse the shit out of normies, and the second season would apparently build off of whatever happens in the Superman movie. After that, Viola Davis will be getting her own spin-off series titled Waller. This was originally supposed to follow Superman, but the Hollywood strikes forced Gunn and company to rearrange their plans. Now it will be released after the second season of Peacemaker. The show will follow Amanda Waller as the head of Argus and her team Peacemaker, as they basically do what the Peacemaker series characters and those from The Authority and Batman do. Basically, take down bad guys when law enforcement either fails or cannot, but the bad guys don't quite reach Superman-level threats. This show is unnecessary, and the Amanda Waller character is not nearly popular enough to justify an entire series spin-off for her. Again, an odd choice from a studio whose parent company is drowning in debt. Lanterns, a Green Lantern series that will feature both Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart, follows Waller on the lineup. It is being described as an HBO quality event in the vein of the detective story. DC has long tried to get Green Lantern launched into the cultural zeitgeist and failed to do so. The closest they got being the rather bad Ryan Reynolds-led Green Lantern movie in 2011. Other attempts followed, but none that ever materialized and found their way into theaters. This show is being described as a detective story on Earth where the two characters return to their home planet to investigate a mystery there. The only solid information known about the series is that Chris Mundy, Tom King, and Damon Lindelof wrote the pilot and the series Bible. It is not promising that Damon Lindelof is involved, given he was the writer for the Watchmen series and Star Trek Into Darkness. I guess time will tell. What follows is one that baffles me on every conceivable level. Paradise Lost is being described as a political drama about intrigue and schemes on Themyscira. For those who forget what Themyscira is, it's the island Wonder Woman comes from. Now, I can only guess this made the cut because it necessarily will be a show nigh completely void of any male characters. This makes complete sense only in Hollywood, where they are under the impression that they can pick and choose their audience. This might be appealing to a female audience if it were not based on a comic book character. Comic books, and the media derived therefrom, have been an overwhelmingly male audience, despite Hollywood and both Marvel and DC trying to run off that audience in an attempt to curry favor with the roughly 25 to 30% of those of the female persuasion who like comic books and movies and television series made based on such characters. Even movies like Captain Marvel and The Marvels could not flip that demographic. Only the iconic Wonder Woman manages to draw in a larger female audience. Sadly for Paradise Lost, she will likely not be among those appearing in the show. Instead, the audience will be treated to The Good Wife, DC Comics style, minus the men. Another entry into the DCU that makes zero sense timeline-wise is Booster Gold, a dishonored football star from the 25th century who travels back in time to pose as a superhero by using the basic technology from his own time. If this sounds stupid, it is. What is even worse is that Gunn and Safran are introducing the character well before they should. Booster Gold is more a character that should be introduced in a second, or better yet, a third phase of the new cinematic universe. That the two heads of DC are describing the series as a straight comedy series set in the DCU makes it even worse. I can see a scenario where James Gunn is the writer and showrunner of this series, and it might be good. However, that will likely not be the case. I cannot think of anyone else I can see pulling off something like Booster Gold as a comedy series. Originally, following the release and modest success of The Batman, Matt Reeves, the director, revealed that work had begun on a spin-off series about Arkham Asylum, introduced in the movie. As things developed, and with Warner Brothers being acquired by Discovery, the project morphed into a series for the DCU. It was supposed to be about the Gotham City Police Department, have a horror tone to it, and have Arkham as a haunted house type of thing. Since it was co-opted by Gunn for the DCU, that might have changed. The only thing known about the project in its current iteration is that Antonio Campos will be writing and showrunning the series. And last, and certainly least, a Blue Beetle animated series was announced to be in the works in June of 2024. This is puzzling and unfortunate, since the Blue Beetle movie that was released in 2023 did about as poorly as one could expect from such a generic and stereotype-laden comic book movie. And despite the movie failing on just about every level, James Gunn and Peter Safran, in their infinite wisdom, have decided to bring all of the people responsible for a movie that lost the studio in the neighborhood of $120 million at the box office and put them in charge of bringing an animated series with the same characters to life. It apparently will build on the movie's story, but yet also, quote-unquote, tell its own story, with the potential of the movie's star, Cholo Maridueña, starring in a DCU film at a later date. When this new universe was announced, the Snyder fans went ballistic. Nothing short of firing Gunn and Safran and giving Zack Snyder their job would ever satisfy them. And while the Snyder vision of DC was more coherent and made way more sense than what the new regime at DC have put together, that was a vision that seemingly failed to understand the true depth and core of what DC Comics is, especially when compared to Marvel. DC is and has always been nothing short of a universe inhabited by gods and heroes, both good and bad. It is a truly American mythology built upon the inspiration of every input Western civilization has had on the development of the American psyche. Seeing Gunn and Safran's upcoming vision of DC, it makes me think they are even further away from this ideal vision of DC. To reboot a franchise is a risky business. It means that what was going on before either was not working or had reached its terminus in storytelling. In the case of the DC Extended Universe, it was not working. Nearly every film was a bust with the exception of Wonder Woman, the first Aquaman, and the first Shazam. And that last was a modest success. Even the sequels for Wonder Woman and Aquaman failed, and failed big. So if Gunn and Safran are going wrong, what would be the right way to do things? Well, that depends on what you are trying to accomplish with the reboot. The problem a lot of fans of the comics had was Snyder took the bleak darkness of Batman and smeared across the entire DCEU with the exception of the previously mentioned 3 films. You know, the ones that actually succeeded. So if you are looking for a tonal shift, starting with Superman makes sense. It is perhaps the only thing that makes sense with the DCU as it has been announced. It seems that everything out of that project is going in a good direction, from casting to the general tone they claim to be going with for the story to even the vague plot synopsis. It is more in the mold of Christopher Reeve's Superman movies and getting us far away from the darker vision of Superman that Man of Steel had. Little else is anywhere near where they need to be going when trying to reboot a major franchise like DC. The second movie, hell, the second project that audiences should be seeing is a revamped Batman. And a Batman that is distinguished from Matt Reeves' The Batman, if you are going to allow that universe to keep going. While I prefer the vision Reeves is presenting with his film, the new DCU cannot go that way, which is a shame. The best Batman ever put before the public in live action was the Tim Burton Batman from 1989 and 1992. Getting back to that version would be the best second film for a new DCU. But it can't, with Reeves out there with his Batman. However, going the direction they are going with Batman also doesn't make sense, since we are skipping basically every comic fan favorite arc in the history of the character in comics to start with the least favorite Robin and a Batman that will necessarily be at least in his 40s, since we are getting Damian Wayne. The next movie after that, assuming the Superman and Batman movies haven't already derailed the DCU with an ignominious failure at the box office, is, of course, Wonder Woman. DC only have 3 top-tier characters, and they are the trinity of DC in those 3 characters. So of course Wonder Woman is next. The fact that the closest the DCU is getting to a Wonder Woman movie is the idiotic Paradise Lost series about Themysciran politics is mind-blowing. Now, whether they are not doing a Wonder Woman movie because they want distance from the Gal Gadot iteration or not is irrelevant. DC without Wonder Woman in the universe is already not going to work, especially if what you are trying to work towards is establishing the Justice League. And if you are not trying to establish the Justice League, then why are you even doing this in the first place? The whole point of making a DC cinematic universe is to make money, and to do that you need to give the comic book fans a reason to be on your side. Bringing the trinity of DC to the big screen and then bringing them together in the Justice League is your route to doing that. Zack Snyder knew this, but DC and Warner Brothers executives were in too much of a rush to get there to ever make it work. After the first three, you need to stick with normie recognizable characters. That means Aquaman, Flash, Green Arrow, Green Lantern, Cyborg, Shazam, maybe even characters like the Teen Titans, Zatanna, the Justice Society of America, Lobo, Batgirl, Supergirl, and Martian Manhunter, along, of course, with their attendant galleries of rogues. If you manage to get into a second phase of your cinematic universe, and fans are still streaming to theaters to watch what you are putting out, then you can try and get creative with things like The Authority and Booster Gold and Creature Commandos and Blue Beetle. Marvel did not get creative until halfway through Phase 2 of the MCU, and it was with one film, Guardians of the Galaxy, which means that the director of that film should know that is how that worked. Who was that director again? Oh yeah, it was James Gunn. What James Gunn and Peter Safran are thinking with the slate they have come up with is beyond me. It is already pissing off the Snyder fans by rebooting their reason for being. What should follow from the decision to reboot in that case should be the safest plan in the history of Hollywood. The DCU is not that plan. Will the DCU work? Maybe. However, there was so much stacked against it even before the slate was announced that said slate should have been a slate of one film. Manage to convince fans about one film before expanding into an entire cinematic universe. What are those things going against the success of the reboot? Well, just to list a few off the top of my head, and in no particular order, are the following. 1. Brand damage. DC and Warner Brothers has spent the last few decades doing an immense amount of brand damage to DC. There are very few bright spots where fans look back on an era of DC with happy thoughts. Christian Bale's Batman run is about it. The Christopher Reeve Superman run started great and crashed and burned. The 1990s Batman run started great and ended in Batman and Robin. And the DCEU was so all over the place that there was never anything to grab onto for fans. 2. The death of the superhero genre. Can superhero movies do well in a climate where normies have checked out of the homework assigning and rapidly declining MCU? Sure, but the bar has been raised and 2023 showed that. All 4 DC offerings bombed, and bombed hard. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was successful, but both Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and The Marvels were 9-figure losers for Disney Marvel. The upcoming Deadpool and Wolverine will probably do well, but that is on the back of Ryan Reynolds' reputation, his previous outings as Deadpool, and the nostalgia of seeing Hugh Jackman return to his iconic portrayal of fan-favorite Wolverine. The DCU has to overcome audiences' weariness of comic book films that have glutted the market over the last decade. And last but not least, audiences' reluctance to go to the movies in the era of streaming. Because Hollywood is run by a bunch of brain-dead idiots who have forgotten how their business model works, they went all in on streaming, a business model that was less lucrative, more costly, and with a lower quality than the theater and terrestrial television model. With the coming of the pandemic and the shutdown of theaters for 2 years, Hollywood has trained audiences to simply wait to see it on streaming. They have added to this problem by making that wait so much shorter than it used to be to wait for movies to get to cable. Some movies are on streaming before they are even out of theaters. This is not a recipe to get people to theaters to watch your movie, and thereby maximize your potential to make money with said movie. The only company making a profit with streaming out of the big 5 or 6 is Netflix, and they have gone the quantity over quality route. Disney+, Max, Paramount, etc. all lose money for their studios. Into that environment comes the rebooted DCU, with a slate that is less than normie friendly that even DC and comic book fans are questioning. Even if Superman is a raging success, the following movies are not lined up to continue that success. It is an enterprise that was already set up to fail, and James Gunn and Peter Safran decided to play it on hell mode when easy mode was so much safer and made more sense. Time will tell if their strategy pays off or not, but in the condition DC and Warner Brothers currently find themselves in, it is not at all clear exactly how much rope Warner Discovery CEO David Zaslav will give them before he hangs them with it and scraps the whole endeavor. That is all I have for this video. If you have enjoyed the videos, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and comment down below. It is all appreciated. Until next time. Tschüss.